Hey guys, today I want to talk a little about raiding and how Wrath of the Machine sort of made me realize how formulaic raiding has become and may continue to be. A lot of people kinda, I guess complained isn't the right word, but maybe we're not thrilled at the fact that the raid only took 2 hours to clear for the world first. My team did it in about 3. Now, part of the problem was that everyone finishing first were 380 and higher light in a raid that was supposed to cap at 385, so the gear struggle wasn't exactly there. But the main reason is because Wrath of the Machine encounters stuck to the same formula that we've been seeing in other raids like Vault of Glass and King's Fall. Crota's End, for all of its faults, at least tried to shake things up, even if Crota himself fell into a similar formulaic approach. The formula for a standard raid encounter is essentially you kill stuff for a little while, then there's a mechanic that happens to weaken the boss shield, and you do that a couple of times. Then there might be another mechanic that you need to look out for so that you don't die, and then you shoot the boss. Then the boss does a big attack that will kill you if you don't do something about it, and most of the time, that something is running away or hiding in some fashion. When I say it's formulaic, I don't mean that it's badly designed or that it's not fun or anything, because I think Wrath of the Machine is a great raid. But things can become predictable. Vault of Glass threw people off because it was the very first raid. Crota's End threw people off at the beginning because it was a widely different experience. King's Fall threw people off because it went super mechanic heavy. But Wrath of the Machine played to the King's Fall style of encounter design while playing to what made Vault of Glass very enjoyable. That's not a bad thing, but it's predictable. So why are these bosses falling into this formulaic approach? Well, mainly because it works for encounter design in Destiny. I seem to recall a designer or developer saying during one of the Bungie raid ride-along streams that the designers don't really like the idea of a big health bar that you slowly plink away at, which I totally get. First of all, they've done that with Skolas, although once Skolas got some tweaks, I thought it was a pretty good encounter, but it's still a 3-man encounter. It's hard to imagine current bosses without shields because the mechanics around most boss fights involve removing their shields so that you can hit them. If you take away the shield, then the mechanic is meaningless. But then there's also the philosophy that Bungie wants every raid to be accessible to the point where any combination of classes can complete the raid, which is very admirable, and I totally get why they do that. It also feels like they don't want these hero moments where one person is in charge of an event. Crota's Sword, Oryx Runner, Warpriest Aura. They don't want the entirety of a raid to be one person's responsibility. You also can't have a ton of things that require tooltips like you can have in an MMO. It's too tough to analyze given how little space that Bungie has to show buffs and debuffs. You also can't have too many environmental effects because of the first-person perspective. If you start dropping fire everywhere, it's way easier to see that in an MMO where the camera zooms out 80 feet. So the more you filter down what Bungie's aim for a raid is and what they can and can't do, the less they're really capable of doing in terms of making boss encounters. Something like the Siege Engine or Crota's Bridge are ways to put a twist on an encounter, but they're non-traditional. They aren't true boss encounters, but rather raid events, which allows for much more freedom since they don't need to confine themselves to their boss formula. Something where they do have freedom is how certain parts of the formula are done. For example, we know we're going to have to get a boss into a phase where they are vulnerable, but how that happens is pretty open. Warpriest, you step on some plates. Golgoroth, you stand in some pools. Oryx, you blow up bombs. Vosik and Axis, you throw some bombs. And in that respect, they've come up with some very interesting ways for players to make bosses vulnerable. I think Axis is a great example. The, oh crap, we gotta do something so we don't die mechanic is also something that they have a lot of freedom on. The Vosik mechanic, where you need to hide in one of the safe rooms, was pretty funny as a mechanic, although the Axis one wasn't nearly as creative. What does all this mean for the future of raiding in Destiny, though? Well, Destiny, at its core, is mainly a casual experience. It's not really a game for the hardcore player. A new raid experience is not coming until Destiny 2 at the earliest. So unless Destiny takes a mighty big swing in the hardcore direction, or Bungie suddenly becomes capable of producing double or triple the amount of content that, let's say, they were able to make with something like the original release of the game, or maybe the Taken King, I don't know if raids really have that much room to grow. They're not really going to make them longer, so they're not going to add more bosses per raid. They're not going to make them less accessible to the player base, so that means any mechanics designed around having a certain class are probably not going to show up. Raids could grow if Bungie chose to add even more advanced difficulties on top of what we have now, but given how few amount of people would probably play said difficulties, it doesn't seem likely that they would spend the time to develop it. That's probably one of the only ways that we would get anything more than what we have now in terms of complexity. This is not to say that I think raiding is going to get any worse, because thus far, all of the raids have been one of Destiny's highlights, and I've enjoyed every single one. But I'm just worried about the newer stuff being figured out too quickly, or it starting to feel like we're just getting the same thing, especially since Wrath of the Machine feels like just a good refinement of the activity. I hope to see more of the non-boss encounters, because that's where things really can get exciting and weird and kind of fresh. Anyway, that is my sort of rant on the future of raiding in Destiny. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.